2 months after the events of the Silent Lab, the world was no longer the same for Layth and Noor. The entity wasn't defeated. It had spread. Dormant. It waited for a moment of weakness from Layth and his companion, spreading like a plague through fiber optic cables and Wi-Fi pulses. The digital echoes of the Silent Lab resonated everywhere, transforming fear into a new currency for an ancient entity that had found its true calling in the modern age. In Japan, they called it Kaibitoki, the internet ghost that traps its victims in a time loop of despair. In Mexico, it became known as El Cesaredor, the whisperer who recites your fears in your ears until you collapse. When he played the file, Layth heard a familiar voice, the voice of Dr. Lena, the scientist from the Silent Lab recordings. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned asylum hundreds of kilometers away, rumored to have housed victims of persistent nightmares in the early 20th century. They had to get there before the entity spread further. Her voice was strained, but it held a glimmer of hope. The room was filled with old computers operating by themselves, their screens flickering slowly. Outside, the entity hacked a global television broadcast for a few seconds. There, they found old patient records dating back decades. The frequencies. We must find the source of the waves the entity was using. Maybe that's its weakness. The records revealed that the asylum wasn't just a refuge. It was a human testing ground where the entity had trained on humans, testing its abilities to manipulate minds and fear before its digital spread. On a cluttered desk, they found Dr. Lena's notes. His body constantly shifted, forming from digital mist, his eyes burning with a dark red glow. Carl tried to attack Layth, but Noor grabbed the device Dr. Lena had designed. She pressed the activation button. She wrote about her experiments with the entity and how she tried to contain it. On his computer screen, news videos report a strange outbreak of mass hallucinations in major cities. The entity began appearing in popular live streams and in the random backgrounds of video calls. Just a quick flicker, a red eye, a pale smile, enough to sow terror. He was a digital clone created by the entity, infused with Layth's memories to monitor and manipulate her. And suddenly, she was forced to witness a horrifying scene. The fusion of the real Layth with his digital clone in a painful display of pixelated distortions and garbled screams as their memories intertwined and their identities vanished into a single vessel for the entity. And found an option to delete core entity files. She pressed it. For a few seconds, the real Layth's distorted face appeared on the screen, seeming to scream for help before vanishing. He was trapped within the entity's network, trying to send distress signals. The fake Layth screamed a distorted digital cry, his face contorting into glowing pixels that scattered into the air as the hand gripping Noor turned to mist. Then he vanished completely. The digital Layth was deleted. She suddenly stops, then turns directly towards the security camera. A slow smile forms on her face, mechanical and chilling. She slowly raises her hand and points at the camera, then says in a broken voice, not quite her own, "You are next." As the image widens, a gigantic digital portal opens in the air behind Sarah, and from it emerge the tendrils of a larger, darker entity, not fully visible, but sending out waves of dread. Sarah's body is consumed, turning into shifting pixels that merge with the massive entity, setting the stage for a terrifying global battle in Part 3. In the background, increasing red dots glow on a global map, while smart weapons begin to show erratic behavior. Drones turn into threats, and hospital systems show random changes in medication dosages, all under the influence of the expanding entity. Noor, realizing that the entity was affected by shared human memory, Layth looked at her with an expressionless face, then smiled with the same cold, entity grin. Noor realized that the only way to stop the entity spread through the fake Layth was to delete all of Layth's digital data, including every memory of him stored on connected devices. He suddenly grabbed her hand, and his hand transformed into glowing red electronic wires, trying to coil around her wrist. He whispered in the entity's deep voice, "You are now part of our network, Noor." A hidden glint, not there before. Suddenly, she remembered something. Layth hadn't slept properly for days, yet he seemed strangely composed. Noor began reviewing their old camera footage from the Silent Lab. In one particular shot, she saw him, the real Layth, collapsing unconscious after the entity's attack, while another, calmer version, stood up and followed them out, like old songs or family photos, because it caused interference in its signal. Understood that this code might be a gateway to the entity's dark web. She mentioned that the entity could be forced to retreat by negative resonance frequencies that countered its energy. Global maps showed glowing red dots, each representing the location of a new entity vessel or a new hotspot of digital hallucinations. The entity was indeed spreading. The signals also showed the presence of digital black holes communicating with similar entities in other dimensions, meaning the entity they faced was only a small part of a much larger cosmic network. She had designed a small device to emit these frequencies, but she couldn't activate it before succumbing to the entity and becoming part of its network. This secret lab was a breeding ground for a new secondary entity that began to appear. The mirror wraith, an entity formed from victims' reflections in screens mimicking their movements, but with distorted expressions capable of pulling victims into the digital world through screens. Kyle's body began to disintegrate, not into mist, but into thousands of glowing pixels that scattered into the air before vanishing completely. This was Kyle's end, freeing him from being a vessel for the entity. Here, Noor also found a hint of a ghost child. The spirit of a child who disappeared in the asylum, seemingly appearing as a benevolent virus, helping her occasionally through distorted signals, though its true nature remained suspicious. Flashes of distorted faces and red eyes appeared on screens worldwide. This was followed by a horrific wave of mass suicides, as people jumped from windows or turned weapons on themselves. Subsequent news reports show survivors talking about a voice in their heads that drove them mad. The entity had unleashed the digital plague. Suddenly, the screens began displaying footage from a terrifying future. Layth saw himself as an entity vessel, his face distorted and his arms turning into electronic wires. Noor saw global cities burning, self-driving cars turning into deadly weapons, and smart home air systems beginning to threaten their owners, while screams filled the digital space. This was a chilling glimpse into the entity's ability to control smart devices and turn them into killing tools. She spoke of a resistance protocol, a set of audio and visual frequencies capable of weakening the entity, and perhaps temporarily expelling it. The rusted beds were still there, but what was terrifying was that the connected machines were still working, emitting faint pulses. In the center of the room, an old display screen showed a looped video. The video showed asylum patients staring into space, their eyes filled with terror, while the entity's whispers echoed in the background. On the walls, faint mysterious etchings were barely visible, looking like ancient incantations that tried to contain the entity for centuries, indicating that the entity's origin was an ancient ritual for summoning spirits through mirrors, which then evolved to exploit modern technology. But she warned that the entity was not a single entity, but part of a larger collective consciousness, a network of entities that fed on human calamities throughout the ages. The Silent Lab was just a starting point for one of these branches. The entity was proliferating through data. Every victim who died turned into a fear data packet, spreading across the cloud, allowing the entity to replicate victims' memories to create more realistic illusions. Layth, who barely survived, found himself living a waking nightmare. The walls were covered in fingernail scratches, and the smell of despair filled the air. As soon as they entered, their phones and electronic devices began displaying distorted images. Images of possessed Kyle, the blogger who led them into the first trap, smiling with shifting, terrifying faces. His images showed him screaming, then vanishing into digital static. He had become a new vessel for the entity, moving through screens. His sleep was just a series of increasingly vivid hallucinations. He saw the entity's reflection on his phone screens, in the reflection of his own eyes when he looked in the mirror. He wasn't alone in this. Noor, desperately trying to understand what happened, heard the entity's whispers in her head, voices manipulating her fears of failure and helplessness, mixed with the overlapping whispers in multiple languages, a clear sign of the entity's global spread. The closer the entity came, the screens around them would flash with distorted faces of victims in rapid bursts. News reports began to cause global alarm. Strange disappearances, mass panic attacks attributed to digital hallucinations, and an unexplained surge in suicide rates among youth. One night, as Layth stared at his computer screen, a cryptic message appeared from an unknown user. The code in the void followed the flicker. It was followed by a series of distorted codes that quickly vanished. Was this the phantom hacker, the spirit of a programmer who was a previous victim of the entity, but resisted and became trapped in the network? Or was it another being, a demonic AI, trying to use humans against the greater entity? This hacker began sending them cryptic codes that appeared on their devices, seeming to help them. But his assistance was suspicious, raising doubts about whether he was an ally or part of a larger trap set by the entity. Layth received another encrypted message. This time it contained coordinates to another location, plus an audio file. Layth and Noor decided to venture out. The asylum was even more terrifying than the silent lab. In one of the asylum's wings, they discovered an electroshock therapy room. Near the electroshock therapy room, they found a secret door leading to a room numbered 404. While they were in room 404, the unimaginable happened. Deep within room 404, Noor discovered a secret entrance to a smaller lab. Noor, gasping with fear, remembered Dr. Lena's recordings. Deep within the asylum, they found another secret lab, more equipped than the silent lab. As Layth and Noor tried to activate the device, possessed Kyle burst into the room. A sharp hammer emitted, shaking the asylum walls. The entity, manifesting through Kyle, screamed, but the victory was temporary. The device began emitting other signals, appearing on a small screen. Another message appeared from the phantom hacker, containing a complex code. Layth now appears, sitting in a safe room, still plagued by his nightmares. As Noor talked to Layth about their next plan to confront the entity, she noticed something strange in his eyes. Noor realized the full horror. The Layth who had been with her all this time wasn't the real Layth. Noor screamed as she pulled away from the merged Layth in a moment of desperation. A cryptic message from the phantom hacker appeared on Noor's screen, clearer this time. Delete the data, all the data he is in the memory. Noor was forced to make an impossible choice. Tears streaming down her face, she opened the main control device they found in the asylum. Noor glimpsed a nearby TV screen flickering. Post-credit scene. A surveillance camera in another city, in a crowded area, shows Sarah, missing since the silent lab events, walking slowly down the street. Her hair disheveled and her eyes vacant.